Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are ranking Sean Baker's filmography. Sean Baker was born in 1971 in Summit, New Jersey. His feature film debut was Four Letter Words in 2000, and he has since made 7 other films, with the most recent being 2024's Anora, which went on to win 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. Many of his films share similar themes: immigration, sex work, and the struggles of low-income families. Baker also loves finding newcomer actors, and in some cases, people who aren't actors at all, and having them take on major roles in his films. Another role in all of his films is occupied by Karen Karuglian, who has appeared in all of Baker's films in various sizes and roles. Baker has been nominated for 4 Academy Awards and has won them all: 1 for writing, 1 for directing, 1 for producing, and 1 for editing Anora. Now, I am definitely a couple months late on getting this video out, a little bit later than I wanted to be, because the whole idea of this series, doing my director ranked, I guess the idea of it's not that complicated. It's just fun to watch, directors' filmographies and rank their filmographies. But this one in particular, the reason I started doing it on the channel was because I had the idea to do it last year with Christopher Nolan, right after he won Best Director at the Oscars. And then, since then, I did a couple other directors. I did Richard Linklater and then did M. Night Shyamalan, and so it was like one of those where it's like, just kind of whatever directors I wanted to do, I want to kind of keep doing those. But I kind of made it a point where I wanted to keep doing whoever wins Best Director at the Oscars. Each year I want to do a ranking on their filmography, and so I always knew I was going to do this. Just with my other themed Letterboxd 4 series I've been doing, that's the one I'm having the most fun kind of prepping and watching all the movies for those. Because of that, I kind of kept pushing off watching Sean Baker's filmography, and so I'm finally getting around to it now. I wish I would have got this up a little bit sooner, but I am excited to just take a look at this filmography and rank these 1 through 8. So without further ado, let's just jump into the rankings. Coming in at number 8, Four Letter Words. A study of the post-adolescent male psyche, Four Letter Words gives an often humorous but raw, unadulterated look at the views, attitudes, and language of young men in suburban America. Four Letter Words was released in 2000 and was Baker's directorial debut. The film stars Fred Berman, Matthew Dawson, and Karen Karuglian. Now, first off, before we get too far into the video, I do want to apologize. I'm probably butchering Karen Karuglian's name. You're probably going to hear me pronounce it multiple different ways as this film goes on, because, again, like I said in the intro, and here he is in all of his films. And in some of the films, he's a pretty main character. Now let's talk about Four Letter Words. I noticed there is this trend for me that I don't know if this is maybe specifically unique to me, or if this is kind of, a lot of people kind of have the same experience or the same thought. But for me, I've noticed that with a lot of directors, their directorial debut falls in one of 2 camps. One, it's the, Get Out, like it is the just star making its I was going to say Hereditary. I'm not 100% sure if that's Ari Aster's. I think it is. The Witch, it's one of those where someone's directorial debut is, so good that it puts them on the map, and, it's just an all-time classic. You love the film, and it's just, incredible, right? Or there's a lot of directors, and this is where we're getting, Sean Baker falls into this category. M. Night Shyamalan fell into this category when I was ranking his. Richard Linklater, a couple of his early films, some of them worked for me, but some of them kind of fall into this category. And this category, what it is it's films where they're a young director, they don't have a big budget, they're kind of experimental, they're so young in their, in the infancy of their directorial career that they kind of know their voice and they know what they're doing, but it doesn't quite all come together. And so you're watching it, and what you're kind of getting, it's a fun experience of kind of looking, and it's almost like peeling back the curtain and just being able to see the origins of a director. Christopher Nolan fell into this as well with Following, is his directorial debut, where it's like you watch this and you're like, yeah, that's not what he would make now, but it's like you see the pieces. And in Four Letter Words, you see those pieces. You see these long conversations. You see the description says the raw, unadulterated, conversations. Some of them, the conversation kind of steers in certain directions at times, and you see these things and you're like, oh yeah, that does feel like a staple of something of Sean Baker's filmography. It feels like a piece that you'll see this kind of be a more prevalent feature in some of his future films, but it just kind of feels a little bit not quite finished here. And in this film, there's oftentimes this multiple scenes where there's just long conversations that are happening, and but there's long chunks where it's like it's a long conversation and then you cut to a long conversation in another room, then you cut back and you're just kind of cutting between the same two groups in the same two rooms. And so it's this thing where it's very long, it's drawn out, a lot of these things, and so it's things where I'm like, okay, it's kind of fun just seeing these conversations, but when the conversations aren't really captivating you and there isn't a whole lot going on, it's one of those where it's, again, it just doesn't feel like it's all coming together, but there is still a nice little touch of, like, you can see the things that are, coming together, and you can see where his career goes from here. But ultimately, just the directorial debut just didn't really work for me. Coming in at number 7, Prince of Broadway. A New York street hustler, specializing in name-brand knockoffs, finds his highly profitable game suddenly complicated when his ex-girlfriend shows up, toting the son he never knew he had. Prince of Broadway was released in 2008 and was Baker's third film. The film stars Prince Adu, Kat Sanchez, and Karen Karuglian. Now, Prince of Broadway is number 3 here for Sean Baker, and it looks like, it's about 8 years since his directorial debut, but there is still, I think, a lot of elements of this being the early Sean Baker filmography that, again, there are a lot of these elements that he kind of gets a little bit better at kind of fleshing out as his career goes on, but he just didn't quite have it all honed in this early in his career. But I will say, for Prince of Broadway, some of the things that didn't really work for me, the things that did, I think it's twofold. There's two things that is, as far as ranking this ahead of 4-letter words. And the first thing is the script. This is the first one where 4-letter words, there really isn't much of a story. It is just you're following a couple I guess one big party, and you kind of get split up into these different groups, and you're just listening to these conversations, and there isn't necessarily a whole ton of action or plot that's going on. There is more plot here. Obviously, you've got, this character, and all of a sudden he gets a baby kind of just dropped off, and so now you've got all this drama that's going on there of him questioning whether it's even his kid, trying to get in contact with the baby's mother and trying to bring her back in to take the baby because he doesn't believe that he has a kid. And so there's kind of these elements here. There is this story and a plot that ultimately, as his films go on, and we're going to see this trend, especially kind of toward the end, the Sean Baker films that I really love are the ones that I think have better scripts, and it's the ones where it's a plot that from start to finish, we're not just kind of meandering and we're not just examining life. There is kind of more to the story. I think that services Sean Baker his films a little bit better, at least for me. So you'll see that kind of as we go on. The second thing with Prince of Broadway that, why I'm putting it over 4-letter words, is I think that the acting is a lot better here. And I think, honestly, from this point down, the acting is such an important and an integral part of Sean Baker's of his films. I talked about it in the kind of the intro. He does this excellent job of bringing in people who aren't really actors, or who just haven't really acted in a whole lot, and bringing them in and being able to create these compelling characters around these people that we don't really know, and it really kind of creates a sense of realism where you're almost like, sometimes it almost feels like it's documentary filmmaking because you're watching these people you don't really know and you're just watching this life kind of play out. And I think that's kind of the style that Sean Baker that pocket that he likes to get into. And I think Prince of Broadway does an excellent job of being in that pocket, but it ultimately, it's not one that really stuck with me. It's not one that's super memorable. Outside of a couple scenes, there are some great scenes here, and again, a lot of that comes from the acting. But ultimately, kind of compared to the rest of his filmography, it just feels like it's a little bit lower on the list. Coming in at number 6, Tangerine. It's Christmas Eve in Tinseltown, and Cindy is back on the block. Upon hearing that her pimp boyfriend hasn't been faithful during the 28 days she was locked up, the working girl and her best friend, Alexandra, embark on a mission to get to the bottom of the scandalous rumor. Their rip-roaring odyssey leads them through various subcultures of Los Angeles, including an Armenian family dealing with their own repercussions of infidelity. Tangerine was released in 2015 and was Baker's 5th film. The film stars Kitiana Kiki Rodriguez, Maya Taylor, and James Ransone. Now, I have a feeling that I think Tangerine might be my most controversial ranking on this list because again, a lot of film. I guess this is another time to a good point to point out that a lot of people love Sean Baker's filmography. I'm not the biggest fan. He doesn't quite work for me the way that he works for a lot of people, and that's okay. Like that's something that we all have certain directors that work better for us or that we love, and maybe other people don't love the same way, and that's just kind of the beauty of art in general, but like a film specifically, of everyone has different tastes and things that work better for them. And so Sean Baker's filmography doesn't necessarily all come together for me, but I know for a lot of people it really does. And in part of that is I know he has, like, of his 8 films, like 5 of them are like 3.7s and up, on Letterboxd, and Tangerine's one of those that's pretty high up. I should have looked this up. I wonder where it ranks in terms of his filmography. It might be like top 2, top 3. I know it's got a high Letterboxd rating. A lot of people really like Tangerine. It's one for me that I have now seen it twice. I saw it once last year and then saw it again this year. And it's one of those that I do think that I kind of liked it more on the second watch. The first watch, you're kind of just caught up in kind of the. It's I don't want to always just like the uncut gems. I think it's maybe the most universal of that kind of type of film of nonstop chaos that you can just say it's uncut gems energy and people kind of know what you're talking about. But Tangerine, it kind of is in that where the first time I was watching it, I was just so caught up in the chaotic energy and bouncing from place to place, and it's a lot of screaming, it's a lot of yelling, it's a lot of fighting, and there's just a whole lot that's kind of going on there where it's just I wasn't really falling in love with any of the characters. I wasn't really kind of. This is one where there is a story, but it's kind of a I don't even want to say 24 hours. It really is just kind of like a day in these characters' lives, and so it's kind of the story. And I've talked about this before on the channel, that a film that's like a day in a life doesn't necessarily have to have this grand story for me to like love it, because I understand that we're following someone from point A to point B in their day. This is one that just, at least on the first watch, I just wasn't very captivated by that story. I wasn't very invested in any of the characters and what was going on. On the second watch, I will say that, I did have more of a, don't necessarily want to say like interest, but more of an appreciation, I guess, for the characters and an appreciation for this world and the story that Sean Baker is telling. And this is another great point to put in here and talk about how Sean Baker, this is his sweet spot. This is what he loves to do. He loves to tell these stories of these underrepresented groups, and in this example, it's a couple trans women that he is focusing on here in this film, showing the and it's always not. And with his films, it's not always he could say, okay, I'm going to make a film about some trans women, and so we're going to focus on these trans rights, and it's going to be these things where these are these amazing, great characters, and here's this beautiful story or whatever. But he's more interested in telling real human stories and saying like, okay, yeah, my main character, it's these trans women, but here's the complicated lives they live. Here's the mess that's going on, the drama, and it's really just kind of this realistic look of these two specific characters, and it's not afraid to it doesn't shy away from some of the ugliness in the situation that they're in, the whole kind of hunting down the cheating boyfriend. Like it's willing to kind of get dirty. It's willing to show you these characters and the extremes, the lengths that they would go to kind of resolve the situations that they find themselves in. And so it is, I think on the second watch I was a little bit more interested in it, and from that kind of just the human story, the human side of it. So yeah, it is one that I don't know necessarily if it's one that I'm going to rewatch again in the future, but at least from one watch to the second, I did like it more, and so I do kind of wonder if it would have that same trajectory each time I watch it, if I just appreciate it more and more. But again, it does feel a little controversial probably that it's this low on my list, because I imagine it's top 3, top 4 for a lot of people, but I am putting Tangerine here at 6th. Coming in at number 5, Takeout. An illegal Chinese immigrant falls behind on payments on an enormous smuggling debt. Mingding has only until the end of the day to come up with the money. Takeout was released in 2004 and was Baker's second film. The film was also directed by Xu Qingso. The film stars Charles Yang, Zheng Huayu, and Wang Taili. Now, I kind of just mentioned it, just talking about, Tangerine, kind of the uncut gem style filmmaking. This is another one that kind of has that, where it is a little bit more just kind of, at points kind of chaotic, and we're watching this a takeout driver that's all behind on all this debt, and he's trying to make this money, and you see these moments where he's kind of getting some money, but then is things are happening. There's one specific scene in an elevator that is very tense and very, I think why this film ranks so much higher for me than you might think, or where I initially thought, was because like that scene stuck with me. And there's a couple other scenes that in this film that are kind of that same energy, and things that like I just, as I was watching it, I kept kind of thinking like, wow, this is really working for me. Like, this film is coming together for me. And this is one that I didn't necessarily do a whole ton of research in seeing kind of how with the co-directors, who kind of was in charge of what, who was in charge of the majority of the story. And so, apologies if I'm kind of accrediting some things in this film to Sean Baker that should have gone to Xing Ching Su. Again, also apologies, I know I'm butchering everyone's names here. But in this film, I think it is interesting because it is just the second film for Sean Baker, and it kind of takes some of the same things that Four Letter Words did, where there is just a lot of scenes where it is just kind of conversations, and we're spending a lot of time in this kitchen and cooking and just kind of having these conversations. Then there's a lot of conversations of as he's delivering the food to people at the doors. There's kind of this back and forth, and you see with different characters the different extents to what those conversations look like. But it does feel kind of similar in a sense to Four Letter Words, with conversations being such a heavy part of it. But this film, I think, does a little bit better of a job of there being a plot, there being a ticking time element, there being stakes, there being something that you can kind of get invested in. Because in Four Letter Words, ultimately I just wasn't invested in these characters. I wasn't invested in anything that was happening. I wasn't invested in their conversations. Here, once you add a little bit more of the plot elements, you're so kind of hooked into some of these conversations, because some of these conversations, even if they're not necessarily super tied into the plot, it still is something that you're getting information, or it's leading you to something else in terms of where the plot is going. And so it feels like everything is calculated, and it feels like you are moving through this story to get to a destination at the end. Now, ultimately, whether it kind of reaches kind of where you're thinking it's going to go, or where, again, this is kind of one that I wish I would have written down on this, because this is one I did watch this a couple months ago, so I don't remember for sure how many days. I guess in the description it says until the end of the day, so maybe it is just kind of from when the events of the plot kind of start kicking in. From that point, maybe it is just one long day. But it still is, when you get to that end, it has that same kind of feature of a day in a life story. It doesn't necessarily matter where it ends, just kind of when you get to that ending, no matter what it is, I'm kind of hooked in, because it did what it set out to do of telling that story. And this is one for me that the Takeout, it worked for me on a level that I wasn't quite expecting, especially because I watched these in order, and so I had already watched Four Letter Words, then I was moving on to film 2, and I was kind of expecting like, okay, maybe Sean Baker's filmography is just going to be rough until I get to the last couple that I know and I've already seen. And so I was just kind of caught off guard a little bit by how much I liked Takeout. And it's one of those films of his filmography, I guess, the next 4 that we're going to talk about, I'll rewatch those pretty willingly. This is one Takeout that, like, I'm willing probably in a couple of years, if I'm just, because I believe it was on Max was where I was watching it, and so it's one of those that's like, if I just happen to be scrolling Max and see it pop up, and I think it's like 90 minutes or something, and if I have 90 minutes to kill, it was a fun time, and I enjoyed watching this, and it was I think a very kind of compelling and an interesting story to see Sean Baker go from kind of, at least what I knew from Sean Baker, to seeing him again. This is one where I think his co-director probably had a whole lot more of a say in terms of representing the culture and things like that, but it is just interesting to see Sean Baker kind of go to a different culture, but still kind of in the same kind of social class that he's kind of examining here. It's this working class person, and it's a story of, again, one day, these different elements that he does a lot in some of his other films. So it was just kind of cool to see the marriage there. And, Takeout kind of surprised me, and I'm putting it here at number 5. Coming in at number 4, Starlet. An unlikely friendship forms between 21-year-old Jane and the elderly Sadie after Jane discovers a hidden stash of money inside an object at Sadie's yard sale. Starlet was released in 2012 and was Baker's 4th film. The film stars Dree Hemingway, Basetka Johnson, and James Ransone. Now, I think when we get into these final four films here, this is where we're getting into the area of Sean Baker's filmography that I was already kind of familiar with before really kind of going into this deep dive into his filmography. And Starlet is so again, and when we get into this range here, this is when we're also kind of introducing the like person that he's finding who's not really an actor, but bringing them in to play a key role here. And so Basedka Johnson is the one here who comes in playing Sadie, who, not really much, I believe, I can't remember off the top of my head if this was her only film credit or if it was like this was her debut and then she did like one other film or something like that, but not really been in a whole ton. But she really just comes in and really brings like the humanity and brings like a human nature to her character, because it just feels like, again, kind of that almost documentary filmmaking style where it's just like it feels like we're just watching, this is a real person, we're watching her life and we're watching her form this relationship with Jane, with our main character. And so Starlet is one of those that I think really kind of brings some of those elements, brings kind of a little bit of that chaotic energy. There's some chaos here, especially with kind of some of the side characters, James Ransone and some of the other characters. They're bringing a little bit more of this chaotic energy. But then it feels like when things, and at the beginning, Jane and Sadie's relationship, that's also just really chaotic energy. But it feels like when they become better friends, and as the film kind of goes on, it feels like there is this synergy, and it feels like there is this connection between these two, to where that is kind of the piece and the release, I guess, from the chaos of this film and of the story, is just seeing these two kind of come together is just a compelling story for me. And this is one where I also think that in terms of Sean Baker's filmography, at least the first four that first four that we've talked about, I haven't been super invested. There isn't a lot of heart that I'm like getting really emotionally connected into these characters. This is the first one, and honestly from here down, this is the first one that kind of starts implementing a little bit more of kind of that emotion that I get connected to, where we're getting toward the end of the film, and when we get into these, the characters are having these fights and potentially breaking up, and the things that are going on there, I kind of cared. This is the first time where I'm looking at this, and it's like, I've cared about this relationship that you've built up, and so now that the troubles and the consequences, I guess, of kind of what's been happening, now that this is all kind of coming to fruition here at the end, it's affecting me a little bit as the moviegoer, as the person watching this film. I get to this ending, and it's like, oh, no, like, you're actually kind of bring that emotion out of me, which is something that I felt like the first couple here on his filmography, they were kind of lacking that a little bit, the emotional human connection. And I guess for some people, I'm sure Tangerine, especially at the ending, the last scene of the film, I can see you kind of reaching that point if you cared, about those characters. But at least for me, these bottom four, or the top four, I guess, on this list, that's when I really kind of started getting emotionally connected, and Starlet was the first one that really kind of brought me to that level in his filmography. Coming in at number 3, Red Rocket. Finding himself down and out in Los Angeles, former porn star Mikey Saber decided to crawl back to his hometown of Texas City, Texas, where his estranged wife and mother-in-law are living. Just as this dysfunctional family seems to be making things work, Mikey meets a young woman named Strawberry working the cash register at a local donut shop. Red Rocket was released in 2021 and was Baker's 7th film. The film stars Simon Rex, Susanna Sun, and Brie Elrod. Red Rocket is actually pretty interesting to me, and kind of shocking that it ended up in the 3rd spot, because Red Rocket was the second Sean Baker film I had seen. Obviously, we'll get to number 1. You probably, obviously, you know what it is if you know Sean Baker's filmography. But this was the second film of his that I had seen, and I remember seeing it, and I remember thinking Simon Rex was great. I really enjoyed his performance. The first time that I saw this film, in 2021 when it came out. But I just didn't really care for the story. I didn't care for any of the other characters. There was a whole lot of things that I was like, I didn't even necessarily really care for Simon Rex's character as much as I just cared for his, all-out performance. And so I kind of was just like thinking it was an okay, fine-ish film. And then I remember seeing everyone's love and praise for it. People were talking about, and this was the first time that I had that realization of like, oh, maybe I don't love Sean Baker the way that a lot of other people do. And so going back and doing this rewatch now, at least from when this came out 4 years later, I remember kind of being a little hesitant when I was getting to Red Rocket and was watching it, because I just remembered not necessarily enjoying it the first time, and I was kind of thinking like, I just, I don't know if this is one that I really wanted to give a second chance to. And I'm glad I did, because I still don't think it got to the level that the rest of his filmography, or at least to the level that a lot of other people view this film at. But at least I personally enjoyed it a lot more on this rewatch, and it was one that I started caring way more about, like, every individual character here. Susanna Son as Strawberry, I think the first time I watched it, I really just didn't really care for her performance. And then this time I was like, she's kind of, as fun as Simon Rex is, and as crazy and out there as he is, Susanna Son's character is the one that is kind of bringing it together, and is the thing that is making it work. If you don't have her character here, then it really is just, you're just watching Simon Rex. I mean, I guess, his character would find something else to do in this town to cause and create this mess and create this tension and everything that's going on in the story. But it really is just, I think a lot of it comes from that relationship between Simon Rex and Susanna Son. What they're doing here is what's creating this, and it's one that I think the kind of the chaos of the story, again, just for some reason I didn't enjoy it the first time. On the second watch, it's one where it's like everything that's going on, the complexities and the inappropriateness and the taboo nature of what this story is what's making it compelling, and is what makes it this kind of frenetic, chaos is really the word I've been using the most in this video here. But that's what this is it's just chaotic from start to finish, and it really ramps up at the end. And I remember the first time I liked it, or first time I watched this, I really didn't like the third act kind of twist and what happens there. And it still feels kind of way out of left field. It's way different than what had been, the film had been about up to that point. At least to me, I kind of felt like it just kind of feels out of place still on a second watch. But I think it's a great way of, again, it's kind of, we're watching, this one isn't a day in a life, this is multiple days, but we're watching just like one person living their life, and, getting this already chaotic situation and just throwing in one more twist, one more, batshit crazy thing to happen in the third act, really, I think, kind of elevates this and takes it into a different place. And so there's just a lot about Red Rocket that I think definitely worked more for me on the second watch. And I talked about it with, Takeout being one that I'm like, oh, maybe I'll watch this in a couple years. I think Red Rocket is kind of in that same thing. I'm like, I don't necessarily need to watch this again, but 3-4 years from now, if I'm just in the mood to watch Red Rocket, I think that this is a film that, with each additional watch, I probably will learn to love it a little bit more and more. And we'll see, at some point, maybe this is one of those films that does get to the point that I like it as much as kind of the consensus audience likes it as well. Coming in at number 2, Honora. A young sex worker from Brooklyn gets her chance at a Cinderella story when she meets and impulsively marries the son of an oligarch. Once the news reaches Russia, her fairy tale is threatened, and his parents set out to get the marriage annulled. Honora was released in 2024 and was Baker's 8th film. The film stars Mikey Madison, Mark Eidelstein, and Yura Borisov. And here's where we put Honora. I do think that if you look at if a lot of people make like a Sean Baker ranked list, I do think a lot of people probably have the same top 2, and it's just kind of maybe about how you're ranking the 2. For me, Honora, the entire time I felt pretty confident I'm putting it in number 2. And I said this earlier in the video, that as his films had gone on, the thing that I started liking more and more with his films is, yeah, he still has the craziness and the, nonstop, not action, but, just the frenzy of what's going on in the situation. But what is working better is just these scripts, the stories, where we're going with this. You can have kind of the crazy, nonstop, just uncut gems again energy that's going on, where there's multiple things, something's happening over here, something's happening over here, everyone's yelling, everyone's freaking out. You can have that, but if that's all you're kind of getting, and it doesn't necessarily go to a place that is like emotionally captivating, then I do think that's what kind of falls apart. But with these, as his film goes on, these last couple last four really on this list, especially here with Honora, it gets to that point where the script is again what is carrying this and what is making it so captivating for me. And I've talked a little bit, or at least in the Prince of Broadway, when I was talking about that, I talked about acting, and I guess I talked about it with Simon Rex and Susanna Son in the last section. But here in Honora is where we get Mikey Madison, and I think that in his entire filmography, obviously Mikey Madison's the one that's won an Oscar for acting in one of his films, but I still think for me it's pretty comfortably the second best acting performance in a Sean Baker film. We'll get to the number one acting performance when we get to number one on the list, but Mikey Madison is just so good, and Yura Borisov, Mark Eidelstein is really good, and that's the one where Karen Karuglian gets like his biggest role. Like he is a main character in this film, where in a couple of the other films he's a little bit more of a side character, maybe only has a line or two, or he's just kind of like in Tangerine, he's just kind of there, I guess, a little bit in the beginning and then mostly at the end, and so much of it revolves around him at the end. But so much of Honora revolves around his character. He is there, he is with Annie during this it's a film that's almost been out for a year now, so I don't feel like I can kind of spoil some of it, but it's when they're going to get this marriage annulled, and Mark Eidelstein's character has just run away, like he's vanished, and so now it's just this goose chase really, and he's such an important part being there with Annie in this. And so Honora, it is the acting is all excellent in this film, and I do think that this is the best example of, even more so than the number one on the list, of a completed script and a completed story. This is one of those where it's almost like, obviously it's best that it's told by Sean Baker, but it's one of those that it's like, this is, you could almost see like multiple other directors kind of having a take on this if they had this script, like how they would have told it. And so I think that's like a positive for like the script and the screenplay being one that I think that it's just a complete story. There's a couple of his other films that I couldn't imagine almost any other director doing some of his films because they're so unique to him. But Honora is just, I think it's his biggest budget for sure, but it's kind of his biggest kind of taking a step back, and it's being the biggest kind of just broad telling story that to where I think not, this isn't to discredit Sean Baker, but just saying that I think other people could tell that story, so it is more so a compliment for the script. And then the last thing I do just want to kind of say with Honora is it's kind of been going through that backlash already of whether it was a worthy Oscar winner and whatnot, and it wasn't necessarily my favorite of in the majority of its categories at the Oscars, but I still do think that it is a great film, and it is a great way to honor a filmmaker who, again, I don't necessarily love as much as everyone else, but a lot of people, especially people in the industry, really love Sean Baker. And Honora, I think, was a perfect film, and it was a perfect year, it was a perfect time. I get all the narrative stuff that came along with it, and it all just kind of made sense why this was the film to award Sean Baker for. It is a good film. I do just kind of wish he got all of these awards for the film that is in number one on my list. Coming in at number one, The Florida Project. The story of a precocious 6-year-old and her ragtag group of friends whose summer break is filled with childhood wonder, possibility, and a sense of adventure while the adults around them struggle with hard times. The Florida Project was released in 2017 and was Baker's sixth film. The film stars Brooklyn Prince, Bria Vinate, and Willem Dafoe. Now, I just said that Mikey Madison was my second favorite acting performance in a Sean Baker film because Brooklyn Prince is, like, she is so amazing in this film, in The Florida Project. She is absolutely incredible. The Florida Project is one of those that, this was the first Sean Baker film I had ever seen, and I saw this before I knew who Sean Baker was. I saw this before I was super into movies. It was one of those that I guess I was kind of getting into movies because I had heard of it, and I saw it probably a year or two after it came out. And I just remember hearing so many people loving this film, and I remember kind of watching it and thinking oh, not a whole lot's happening. This is one of those where it's there's a little bit of a plot, but especially the beginning of it, so much is just kind of like the description said, being told through this childlike wonder. We're just kind of seeing these kids at Disney World, or I guess the hotel kind of off of Disney World. So it's it almost feels like this magical place. And I think that's what I really love about this film is you get the drastic the duality of it, I guess, where you get the childlike wonder from the kids, where a lot of that does just feel like some of Sean Baker's earlier work, where we're just kind of following these kids, we're having these conversations, we're doing this and this, and maybe it's not necessarily leading to this specific plot point, or it's not leading us along. But then you have the contrast to where when we're following all the adult characters, you're seeing all the stress and you're seeing the decisions that they're making, the particularly the bad decisions that they're making, and you're seeing how these bad decisions, it's this snowball effect, and everything that's happening to our characters is all coming from these bad decisions. And so there's a lot kind of there that I think is very interesting and it's very enticing, and I love the duality of that, seeing the innocence from the kids and seeing the harsh reality from the adults. And it's really the harsh realities from the adults, like that's what's stringing this plot along. But I do love that the film kind of ultimately just kind of ends with, again, because we're spending so much time focusing on the kids and their kind of this magical friendship, this magical summer that they're having. And the film, when it is a sad and it's a tragic kind of conclusion to the story, we still finish it through the eyes of the kids. We're finishing it through that magical wonder and whimsy. And I think it's just this story that, for me, this is the one of all of his films. I feel like I like all of Sean Baker's films a little bit less than the general consensus. I think The Florida Project is the one that I like just as much as everyone else. Like, everything here worked for me, and I didn't even really at this point haven't even mentioned Willem Dafoe's character. Caleb Landry Jones is also in this. Like, there's a couple of these kind of bigger name. I guess at the time Caleb Landry Jones probably wasn't all that big, but because I think, did this come out the same year? Yeah, 2017, right? So this came out the same year as Get Out. But anyway, so he's Willem Dafoe's character. He brings a different side of humanity to it. He's almost like the bridge a little bit between the kids and the grown-ups, and the he's able to kind of help the kids at times still kind of have that childlike wonder while also being like a firm, strict person to the adults in this, in certain situations and in different scenes, the different adults he's interacting with. And he does an excellent job of also just kind of being like a protector for the kids. There's multiple scenes where he's kind of standing up for Brooklyn Prince and her friends. So he's an excellent character. The Bria Venante, I probably butchered her name. She's another one of those that, not really an actress, but Sean Baker, I believe he found her on like Instagram, and so brought her in for this role. She does, she's not necessarily the most, amazing actor, but like for this specific role, she embodies this person so much. To, again, this is probably the third or fourth time I've said this in this video, where almost at times with her character feels like you're just watching, at least in this case, not a documentary, but you like almost feels like you're watching maybe like a vlog, like someone making a YouTube video. Like, she feels like she is just a real human. She is a real person. She embodies that character very well. And so again, there's just so much about the Florida Project that I like, but most of it really comes back to, again, that plot and the being able to balance those two extreme narratives. But really, ultimately, so much of it hangs on Brooklyn Prince and the amazing performance she gives. By far my favorite performance in a Sean Baker film, and it makes the Florida Project my favorite film in Sean Baker's filmography. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below in the comments how you would rank his filmography. Do we agree or disagree where our major differences? Would be interested to see that down below. Also, while you're down there, just let me know if any directors you would like to see me do next in this series. I don't know when there's one director I've kind of been I was working on last year, but it's been months since I've like watched any of his films, and so I might get back into finishing up his director ranked video. But let me know just any suggestions you have of those in the comments as well. And if you would like to like this video and then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos in this series or any of the other series I have on my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.